Hello, test takers. This is Brian Lee, founder of Test Geek Exam Prep. I want to come to you today and discuss the new settlement that will begin very shortly. This is the third settlement change since I've been in the industry, and it constantly gets smaller and smaller. This change will occur May 28th, 2024. I wanted to put that date in there to record it, make sure we know when this video was recorded, and it will be relevant for the next 6 months, I will bet you, for a couple of reasons, which we'll discuss here in a few minutes. So let's discuss, first of all, what does settlement mean, of course, right? To me, settlement simply means the administrative process for transferring ownership when you buy or sell securities. Okay? You can imagine the millions upon millions of transactions that occur each and every single day, right? We have to actually transfer ownership, let's just say some stock shares, from the person who's selling it to the person who's buying it. Now, again, with the advent of technology over the last 20, 25 years or so, a lot of that transfer, the administrative process, obviously has become digital. So it's a lot easier, it's a lot more accurate, it's a lot faster. When I was first in the business, I almost hate to admit this, in the early to mid 90s, the settlement took 5 days from the trade date. It used to be T plus 5, trade date plus 5 business days. And so since then, since I got in the business, that settlement period has become shorter and shorter. So that on May 28th, 2024, it will now shrink to trade date plus 1. I think it's interesting because way back in the Stone Age, when I first started, right, there were still a lot of paper certificates that people actually own. Stock certificates, bond certificates, right? So you'd have to imagine, right? They'd have to lug those things into the brokerage firm, and there'd be a power that the broker-dealer would have the customer to sign, giving the brokerage firm the right to transfer the ownership, have to take it to the transfer agent. My goodness, now you can see why it used to take so long, right? I used to have some clients who would physically own their stock certificates. A lot of people felt that, if it's in my hands, then it's safer. Well, we tried to convince them not to always have them stored at the brokerage firm, at the custodian, at the transfer agent. Far safer that way. As a matter of fact, we used to have some customers who would call up, buy 10 shares of Disney. They just had a newborn, right? They wanted to buy Disney stock. And they would always ask for you to ship out the certificates, the actual paper certificates, because it had a nice, beautiful picture of Mickey Mouse on it. And they would frame these stock certificates and put it in their little nursery. Where I first started in the brokerage business up in Seattle, same thing. People would buy Boeing stock, have the certificate shipped to them because it had a beautiful jet plane on the certificate. As a matter of fact, the certificates were really a work of art known as calligraphy. They were amazing artwork. It really was. Now, of course, as we got into the digital age, those paper certificates were just so cumbersome to deal with, right? You'd have to bring them in. Like I said, you'd have to get a transfer power, get it to the transfer agent. So, all of that. Now, of course, it's all digital. Right? We don't need 5 business days to transfer stock ownership from one person to another, and or the transfer of money as well. I had a mentor who started working like in the late 60s in Minneapolis. He said farmers used to come in with a sack of cash, actual cash, to buy securities. I couldn't even imagine that. Okay. So we've gone a long way. I mean, that's been 50 years for all these changes to occur. So one of the reasons why the settlement, the administrative process for transferring ownership, is now only 1 business day after, because it's all digitized now. There's very few paper certificates that are even printed up. I think you might still be able to get them if you request them. I don't even know. I haven't even seen a certificate in probably 20 years. Okay. So anyway, that's why it's got a little history behind it, right? There's new settlements. A trade date plus 1 business day, right? So if you buy or sell a stock or bond on a Tuesday, ownership transfers the very next day, right? Wow. Big change. Okay. Now, how is it going to affect the exams? That's why you're here today, right? We want to know how these are going to affect the exam. Now, look, we see these process changes, minor rule changes occur all the time. Every year there's got to be some, right? It just wouldn't be the securities industry if we didn't have changes. Anyway, so the first thing we want to talk about is how this is going to affect the tests and which tests specifically they're going to affect and some of the concepts that you may see, okay? So now, first of all, when there are rule changes to exams, they don't just start adding the new questions on May 28th. They can't do that. That would affect, the risk level, the pass rate. They got to test drive these questions. Everybody has to be taking these exams with the same risk level, right? So they're not just going to start adding new questions. As a matter of fact, these test writers hate adding new questions to the test bank. It's not very prudent for them to do that. It just changes too many things. So here's what they do. Oh, and besides, when do you add new questions? Would it be midnight New York time or midnight Honolulu time, right? I mean, what's that? 6 hours difference between those two cities. So, there's too much difficulty. So what they'll do, obviously, is they'll take out any of the old or outdated questions, right? The settlement has been T+2, right? For the last, year and a half, 2 years? I can't even remember. Again, it's changed 3 times since I've been doing this. So they'll take out any of those old questions, okay? Now, they won't start adding new questions the next day. They just won't, okay? They have to test drive them a little bit. That's why there's always those experimental questions, right? Those 5 to 10 extra questions that aren't graded. They don't tell you which ones they are, right? So we suspect we're not going to see any of these new settlement questions for at least 3, 6, 9 weeks down the road when they may start adding them to the experimental questions. Generally, when we see these test changes, the new questions that actually may matter, right, might take 6 to 9 months before they are started added to the questions that are counted, that are actually go to your score, okay? So don't worry about this thing on May 29th, ruining everything you've read in the textbook and all those sorts of things. The questions just won't do it. They just don't do this. The Secure Act, right, that changed IRAs and distributions and RMDs and those sorts of things, that took a good year for those questions to start coming in. So again, we see these changes quite often. Okay, so it's going to be probably 3 to 6 weeks at least before they start added to the experimental questions, 6 to 9 months before they start added as real questions. Okay? Now, which exams will these affect the most? Well, almost all of them, actually. The SIE, the Series 7, there's a couple of these that I want to talk about, especially for the 7, as well as Series 65 and Series 66, okay? I think the 7 is probably the one where it might affect it a little bit more than some of the other exams, okay? Now, so what concepts are then going to be affected by this? Well, the first thing, of course, are dividends, right? The X date and the record date. Now that's going to change a little bit. I think it's actually going to be a little easier. I think the T+2 made it easy. This is going to be even easier. I'll show you why. Okay? With a T+1 settlement, remember, Here's the trade date. Here's T+1. This is when ownership changes hands. As a matter of fact, you become right on the shareholder list on the day your transaction settles. So if you want to receive a dividend, you have to be owner of record by the record date. Okay? Now, so you transpose that onto the record date, X date, all those sorts of things that the corporation announces. So let's say they announce that Thursday, August 10th will be the record date. So you have to be shareholder of record by the 10th, right? Well, that means you simply have to buy it at least 1 day prior. If you buy it on the record date, you're too late, right? Because it needs 1 day to settle. So if it's August 10th, you would have to buy it no later than, not Thursday, but Wednesday, August 9th. That means that if you bought it on August 10th, you'd be too late, okay? Because you wouldn't become shareholder of record until the next day. You know what that's called? The first day the stock trades without the right to the dividend, that's the X-dividend date. See, this is why I think it's easy. The X-dividend date and the record date are now one and the same. Okay? You must buy it before the record date or you're too late. It's that simple. Okay? That's why I always refer to that X-dividend date is the too late date. So you have to buy it before it's too late, which happens in this case to be the record date. Record date and the X-dividend date have to be the same. Okay? That's for all cash dividends. Now, to be honest with you, I have a couple of these X-date, record date questions in my practice final. I don't think I even have to change them because in my questions, they're just merely definitional questions. Again, and I always like to concentrate on in my classes and in my tutoring sessions with basic definitions. Because on the test, right, there's really two kind of questions they're going to ask you. Basic definitions and then application of those definitions, right? That's when they start adding the dates and those sorts of things. Like the SIE, I know, starts adding dates and says, okay, when's the last day you can buy it, right? When is the too late date? And they'll ask you, is it Thursday, August 10th? Is it August 9th? Is it Friday, August 11th? You know, those sorts of things. They'll start throwing dates at you in some of the FINRA exams like the SIE, the Series 7. The NASA exams, 65, 66, tend to be a little bit more definitional rather than application. So again, let's run through that, right? Again, just for my ease of remembering, it's the too late date, right? You have to buy the stock before it's too late. That's the X-dividend date. Now, the technical definition, the first day the stock trades without the right to the dividend. I mean, that's what the prefix X means, without, right? Without dividend. Okay? The X-dividend date, the date the stock first trades without the right to the dividend. That's the definition of X-dividend date. Now, I've seen or heard those questions show up on the 65, 66. Fairly basic question, definition. Record date, of course, that's the date in which you must be on the corporation's books as a shareholder in order to receive that dividend. Okay? Now, again, with the new settlement, the record date and the X date are now going to be the same. Okay? That's pretty easy too. I don't see where these questions are going to become any more difficult than you might think they are today. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to be a little bit easier. Because again, those dates are the same. Just beware of the definition. Okay? The first day the stock trades without the right to the dividend. The day you must be on the corporation's books as a shareholder in order to receive the dividend. Those are the definitions. Okay? So again, that's one concept where the new settlement may affect. Again, it's SIE, Series 7, 65, 66. I guess I should also point out that I don't really think it affects much the Series 6 or the Series 63. I just don't see or hear many of these ex-dividend questions, not as it applies to stocks and bonds. The Series 6 may ask about it as it relates to mutual funds. That's a little different, okay? And that's not going to be affected by the new settlement. So, all right, so dividends, X dates, record dates, that kind of thing. The other one is more Series 7 specific, where it comes to the accrued interest on bonds. Because we had to sometimes calculate how many days of accrued interest a seller would receive. And we had to count up, right? Every month is 30 days, right? Unless it's a government bond and then it's actual days, that kind of, I don't want to get into all the accrued interest stuff. But that's going to change because the ex-dividend date is now the record date, that kind of thing. So that might change the number of days of accrued interest. Now, since 2018, of course, when the SIE was created and the Series 7 was reduced from 250 questions, the old Legacy 7, and today's 125 question Series 7, we haven't been seeing as many questions on how to calculate or how many days of accrued interest would show up on the test. Again, it tends to be definitional. And again, those questions really haven't changed much. For accrued interest, right, we have to count the number of days up to the day before settlement. Now, they used to try to trick people by taking the settlement period over the weekend, and you don't include weekends and those kind of things. I don't know. They may try to do that kind of mess again. But now with settlement at T+1, day before settlement becomes the trade date. Okay? So you just count up the number of days up to the trade date. Done. Okay? Again, I think that's a little easier. Boy, this new settlement sounds like it's going to be a lot easier, especially for test takers, right? So the accrued interest is one thing that I can think of that may affect Series 7, but again, not much because it's a definitional question nowadays rather than computational. Again, textbooks, Q banks, those sorts of things, I'm sure they're scurrying to change all this stuff as well. They'll probably put those calculation questions, and you know how the Q banks, right? They go 8 degrees deeper than the test typically does. So, they may have that. But again, I'm the test geek. I care about what's on the test. Only what's on the test. How it shows up on the test and how you should answer, right? I'm the great distiller, dirty mashed potatoes in the premium vodka. At least that's what I try to do, okay? So again, that is the new settlement starting May 28th. You're probably not going to see any questions for quite some time down the road. And again, the first questions we see most likely will be experimental questions that won't count for or against your score. Okay? Those probably won't start, we might be looking at the end of this year or the beginning of 2025 for all we know. Okay? Any questions, please feel free. Shoot me an email, Brian at testgeekexamprep.com. And of course, you can find all of our video courses along with the downloadable PDFs that come with it at testgeekexamprep.teachable.com. Have yourself a great day. Go get that P. Get this god-awful thing out of your life. Take care. Bye-bye.